What does protected thinking time look like in a busy business?
Firstly, protected thinking time has got to be really, really valuable. So, and we're talking about leadership, yeah?
Yeah.
So when you look at a leader in any business, if they don't give themselves the capacity to take time to reflect, then things are going to snowball pretty quickly and the pressure will mount up, and then before you know it, they're kind of like the busiest person. So I think in the very simplest terms, carve out an hour, 2 hours a week where you can just, reflect, take time out, whatever that might look like. It may be that you do it on a daily basis, in which case it might be a smaller period of time. It could be getting out of the office and going for a walk. It could be a bit of meditation in the morning. I mean, for me personally, I get into here early. I spend a bit of time in meditation, and then I have a clear deck where I'm able to really focus on the day ahead. And I think the other side, it really for me, it came from a military habit. Certainly when I was company sergeant major, you got 190 soldiers to look after. Suddenly your day is pretty busy after first parade. So I used to get into the office probably between 6:30, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And it was my time. I got most of my work done during that period, but in many respects, it was the reflection time that it gave me for the rest of the day.
What do high-performing leaders do differently when things start to go wrong?
Composure, I think. When the proverbial starts to hit the fan, I think a high-performing leader or an experienced leader knows to take a moment. I think in the early stages, it's kind of like you'll realise that you'll take a moment just to get clear and get the clarity in terms of what's going on and what needs to happen. As that experience gains and grows, actually it becomes a subconscious piece that actually you don't even realise, but you're just into pressure mode and you're into response and react. It's that notion that when the pressure hits, it's kind of like you're that calming influence that when everybody else around you is losing their heads, you're pretty clear and focused in terms of, okay, what do I need to do next? What's happened and how do you go about actually responding to the situation? So it's born through experience, and that's got to be born through also through training. So for me, 28 years in the military, really gave me that level of insight as to how I need to respond and what I need to do under pressure.
Okay, and how would you advise leaders to, learn to deal with pressure effectively, when they've just started out, they're a new leader?
There's a lot of self-induced pressure in business, and most business owners that I work with, or most of them that sit around the table in the boardroom, experience that pressure. And I think it's a level of self-awareness of recognising that pressure's there. The military is great because, the best way to actually train for pressure is to put yourself in pressure situations.
Yeah.
So when I was serving, I mean, I was both put through the ringer on that, and also, later periods of my career, I was the one that would put other people through the training. But you trained for the pressure. In business, it's slightly different because it's not like you can just say, we're going to train for this and what happens, in this scenario. But that said, you can still sit around with your team and run a scenario of kind of like what happens. I always talk to my business owners we're working with about having a risk register in place or a business continuity plan. If we're going to put those things in place, then it is an absolute ideal training area and training ground for you to, what do we do if this scenario happens? But rather than just talking about it around the table, actually role play it in the business. Go through exactly what you're going to do. Add the pressure to it. In some instances, and I know businesses that will actually instigate that particular response without telling the team. Just the leadership knows,
right.
So that they're able to role play it and they can see what actually happens with the rest of the team as it goes. So experience is one aspect, training is the other, and I would absolutely promote, and it's certainly something I do with the clients in terms of really how do we train for this? How do you make sure that you've got and can build some experience? The other side of it is shit goes wrong in business. So as your business grows, you're gonna experience that. And again, that's the ground where the moment you recognize that you're under those circumstances in that pressure, it's kind of like you can take a moment, you can then, reflect and actually start to deal with it as you've trained to do it.
Yeah.
Which, in the simplest terms in the military, was a case of situation awareness, what's happening, what's caused it, what are the impacts, and then, construction of the plan, how are we going to get out of this? Two very, very different sides to a coin of responding to pressure.
Okay, and with the current executive leaders you currently work with, have you noticed certain, similarities with the kind of pressure they face and how they usually deal with it, which is not, a good way of dealing with it?
The biggest challenge is often is a sense that everything is on their shoulders. So the challenge that something's happened in the business, or someone has done something in the business, or there is a classic phrase actually, and it comes from the health and safety world, is vicarious liability. So the reality with executives and with business owners is that level of vicarious liability means that if stuff goes wrong in a business, it's your fault. Now, the challenge that they face is recognizing the moment that happens and how they respond to it. So unless they have that moment's recognition, they can end up actually, running down and running around almost like a headless chicken, trying to work out something without actually taking it or having any time to, as I mentioned earlier, to really reflect on how do I deal with this situation? How do I overcome this situation? You can't discount experience for it. What I do as an executive coach when I'm working with these folks is help to raise a level of awareness of those situations. We'll have a coaching session and there will be a very live situation that's ongoing, right now. And, just through some questioning, through some positioning, through some scenario playing, we're able to determine, what are the courses of actions that are open to you. So suddenly we can then start to see with clarity what decisions that we've got. There's a great book out there called The Road Less Stupid, and one of the things that he talks about in the book is, when you come to these situations, it's what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario, and what can we live with in the middle? Answer those three questions in any moment of pressure, and you'll get some clarity in terms of what's that next step. And in the simplistic terms, that will serve you pretty well.
Right. So, when you look on LinkedIn posts out there, you see that many people tell you to avoid micromanaging because it's something that will kind of decrease employee engagement. What is your take on micromanaging employees?
Okay. Whilst I wholeheartedly understand the context of where people are coming from, I think actually micromanagement gets a bad press, and this will be kind of controversial for a lot of people to hear. Micromanagement, when it's done appropriately, actually can support the development of your team. The problem is that, the label itself just kind of what it actually refers to is, the manager, the leader, the business owner, the executive, or whoever it might be, putting the superhuman pants on and actually getting right down into the weeds and actually doing it all. Now, I think I've said to you before, I've been in that situation where, I had a stark slap in the face from one of my, actually it was, at the time, it was my platoon sergeant, where, I was micromanaging everything. He was supposed to sort out all the administration, but because I'd been there, done it, and I knew it, and I was the legend of the platoon and the platoon commander, and everything was about me, then I was doing it all. And at the moment he came up to me and he said, "Look, Steve, will you just let me get on with my effing job?" And I'm kind of like, penny dropped. What I understand in terms of my military experience and how that leads to today, to micromanage somebody is very focused and targeted on somebody that needs development. So micromanaging somebody means that you're giving a level of clarity at the macro level or the micro level that they need.
Right.
So they need some clarity in terms of what it is that they specifically need to do. Now, that in its own right, sometimes the message isn't clear. If I use the phrase, the communication is the response that you get, there are a number of occasions where people get that wrong. They're not clear in the objective of what they're trying to achieve or what they want somebody to do. Right. So if we don't give that clarity, that's a major mistake straight off.
Yeah.
So we give them that clarity in terms of what it is they need to do. Then we tell them what are the constraints. When does it need to be done by? What resources do you need in terms of time, people, logistics?
Right.
That is micromanaging, but it's micromanaging to help develop somebody in a particular role or job that needs it. The micromanaging that a lot of people refer to on LinkedIn, and they're just caveating the phrase, is the superhero. It's the person that's going in there and I can do everything myself because it's quicker if I do it, and I've been there and I've done that and it's wrong. But you've got to learn that. But don't mistake the fact that micromanaging has a place to develop people. You've just got to understand what it actually means. It means giving clarity, having clear directive in terms of what are the constraints and the limitations that they can do. What resources do they need in time, in business, finance, logistics, people, and when you're going to go back to support them. So again, do we turn around to them and say, like, you've got a week to do it, and then come back a week later? I would say you've got a week to do it. I'll see you on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to come back and have a chat with you on Thursday. So you've got at least a day or two to finish it off.
Right.
Micromanaging isn't a bad thing. It's misunderstood and misrepresented. Generally speaking, by leaders who have got the very best willing intention, they're just sitting around in their superhuman pants because everything is about them being the one to do it. And that isn't an ego-driven thing, by the way. It is an urgency-driven thing because the pressure is on them. It goes back to that vicarious liability. So that's kind of like my take on micromanagement.
What's the fastest way a leader loses credibility in a high-pressure environment?
The fastest way leaders lose credibility is losing their shit. In the bluntest terms. From my military service, I can remember many occasions where, and this comes on both sides of the fence, by the way. So when I was a trainer at the infantry battle school, so we were training sergeants to be platoon sergeants and platoon commanders in terms of fieldcraft. So actually attacking the enemy, all that type of stuff. So high pressure, high volatile situations that you had to put these commanders through. The very best ones always took a moment. They just didn't matter how much pressure I was putting on in the background. And again, short of shooting them, which I couldn't do for obvious reasons, you add pressure by kind of like, what are we doing next? What's happening? Where are we going? Where's the enemy? What are you doing? Yada, yada, yada. And by the way, that's not a small tone. You're kind of yelling at these soldiers. But it creates pressure because they're under the pressure of a command appointment and wanting to get the command appointment because they've got to get the command appointment to pass the course. But we weren't shouting because it's kind of like you're an arse. Because we have to induce pressure. So they're under the self-induced pressure, then we add a bit of pressure to it. Mm-hmm. The very best, and indeed the good, not even just the very best, but the good leaders, no matter what was going on, took a moment. They just took that moment to assess the situation. What is happening, why it's happening, what's the impact, what are my options? This goes back to that situation awareness. The ones that struggled were the ones that just immediately just jumped down and started shouting. Now you can see that in business today. It won't be necessarily someone that starts shouting, but it's someone that starts barking orders, barking direction, do what I say, get this done. And very rarely do I see that level of response is one that is has any long-term benefit to, or even short-term benefit to actually solving and resolving the problem. So the real challenge is not necessarily just knee-jerking straight into something, but just taking that moment just to get a handle on what's going on.
Right.
Now, I can say that with some certainty in business that it will work, as it did in the services, and again, both in training and operations at the teeth end of it. You have that moment, and that in the services, that moment can be incredibly highly pressured. But what I've seen on countless occasions is people at that moment and that point in time, they fall into flow. Because of the level of training, it just clicks into place. And you can see it. You can see how they respond. You can see the direction they're giving. You can see the calm influence they have on the guys when everybody else is kind of like, right, shit, what do we do now? Yeah. And the same in business. And I kind of like when I'm working with business owners or executive, it is kind of like, when those high pressure situations are there, it is helping them to take that moment to get some clarity. to get some focus in terms of what's happening, to look at the options that they've got available to them, and then to start to make some informed decisions. And I think, you know, the good leaders, not just the very best, but the good leaders are the ones that take that moment.
What's a standard in the army that would shock most business teams?
Interesting. The one that comes to mind, and this might be a little bit contentious when people reflect on this, it's the work hard, play hard ethos. And it's also something that I think I've known a lot of veterans, it's bit them in the arse when they've left the military and then started a new job. But it's kind of like the bit that was a biggest shock for me when I left the military and came out. And although I'd started my own business, was, you know, the folks that I was working with, it's very much 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Start work, I finish, and I, you know, kind of like that's it. That's, you know, the vast majority of people, and that's reflective in terms of you know, the global state of the workplace. You know, in the UK at the moment, if I remember rightly, only 10% of the UK workforce is what we would call actively engaged. 90% of it isn't, and I think 16% of it is actively disengaged. In other words, they're digging their heels in to be a pain in the arse in business. And I suspect anybody watching this will know those people in their business. So the biggest difference in the military is there is no 9 to 5. And you know, we have a phrase that was, you know, kind of used quite a lot, was called dig out blind for your mucker, or the buddy. And so you know, going back to what I was saying earlier, I know veterans that have come out, they've started a job, and they've gone in there and they've walked into the office, and the first thing they do is, you know, got to be there for 8 o'clock. So they roll up at 8 o'clock, and then they'll spend the next half an hour making a brew and having a chat, because that's what we did in the military. If you were, you know, back in barracks and you had, you know, work to do, you'd have your parade. Directly after parade, you go grab a brew, you have a bit of a chinwag, and then you're into, you know, getting the work done. But the biggest difference was you didn't go and you didn't finish till the work was done. Whereas what was different here is you can have that brew in the morning and stuff, and kind of like the business owners look at you going, actually, that's my time now, because their expectation is come 5 o'clock, you're walking out the door. But, you know, my mentality, I don't even know what 9 to 5 is. I've never worked 9 to 5 in my life. I don't do 9 to 5 in my business. You know, so that in team is probably one of the biggest dynamic shifts that I've seen. What I have seen, and something I do work with the teams, is this level of actively engaged individuals in a business, because those people exist, not just veterans that have come but there are generally, you know, people in business outside of the business owners and directors who will be committed, and they'll stay there until the job's done. But it's not a default setting, which in the military, it flips. They'll whinge about it, don't get me wrong, but they'll still be there at 9 o'clock at night if the job needs to be done. Whereas you don't get that out here. Not in the same context. I think that's probably the biggest difference I've seen.
What leadership behaviours are completely unacceptable in the army, but very common in business?
Okay, it's an interesting question, that one. How do I answer that? I think the easiest way for me to answer it in some form of context. So, leadership behaviours. I think in the military, leaders have authority to give orders. You know, there is a military law. You have them out in the, you know, in business world of values, but in the military you have values and standards. Right. So the standards of legal, professional, and ethical, and then obviously the values that are relevant to how people turn up. But the mere fact that you can give somebody an order is kind of like, okay, it cuts through a lot of the noise that you get. So there's a real interesting, you know, concept for any leader. You know, we can talk about leadership in multiple different ways, but leadership in itself is presented with a myriad of challenges. You know, you might turn up and feel a little bit upset today. I don't know that. But the moment I start giving you some direction or whatever, it's kind of like, you know, your face tells me a completely different story. You might have had a bad day. You may well not be feeling it. You could be ill. You might not like the job that you're in. There's a whole myriad of different things that kind of like have an impact in how I turn up as a leader, and the impact that, you know, for you. But in the military, it isn't that there isn't any compassion or anything of that nature, but it's kind of like there is a job to be done. And so with the mere fact that everyone understands that there's a kind of like a protocol, a set of orders, and you've got to get shit done, you kind of like, sometimes it is really a case of dry your eyes and get on with it. Out here today, if you turn around to somebody and say, look, dry your eyes, get on with it, you are immediately cast as some, horrible individual because you don't care. Now, the military wasn't a case of we didn't care. We just had purpose. And that purpose went from, the grassroots all the way up to the colonel of the regiment. And trust me when I say there was a level of caring in the military. I mean, my last role in the military was that of welfare officer. Go name me a business out here that has a welfare officer or a welfare manager or a welfare director. There are very few or far between. And indeed, in the 13 years I've been doing this, I haven't met one yet. In fact, in the corporate world, it's human resources. If anything, that's probably the closest to me, but I was a welfare officer. I was there for welfare. So the balance was really right. And, you could have a bad day and I might not need to know that. And I might not even care that you're having a bad day because I'm not really paying that much attention. But you've then got a whole welfare background that you can go and have a conversation with about that. But at the core of what we did, we had that purpose. And so the mere fact that there was a level of authority that came with leadership was kind of the biggest difference I see from how effective leadership is in the military to out here. Mm-hmm. Does it come with risk? 100%. I wouldn't mention names in any way, shape or form, but I know of many occasions where there are laissez-faire, toxic, where there are bad leaders, and I've seen them firsthand. You'll get that in any organisation. But the vast majority are educated and trained, in terms of good leadership. But I think that if you think about management leadership, the command piece, the authority piece of being able to give orders in the military is a significant difference. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Brilliant.
What would happen to a leader in the army who avoided difficult conversations?
I think in those instances when, if a leader avoids difficult conversations, they're very quickly, one, I don't think they're going to be very well respected from the team or the peers. And two, they're going to be out of touch pretty quickly. Because I think in any walk of life, one of the biggest challenges for any leadership is kind of like, what are the conversations, the topics, the areas, the issues that I need to address and have a conversation with. The question really is then, what is it about that conversation that is holding the leader back? What is it that's stopping them from having the conversation in the first place? And I think, that's where you can then start to unravel where that opportunity comes for their growth. But very quickly, any leader that avoids difficult chats, difficult conversations is going to struggle in terms of, I guess, the team being behind them.
Where do leaders unintentionally create problems in their own business?
Often that's driven through, I think in the first instance, they may well forget what drives them in the first place. A lot of business owners you talk to, when you ask them, why did you start? What was your why, your purpose? Business has a habit of getting very, very busy very, very quickly, and then they forget what they're there for in the first place. That leads to a lack of clarity. Mm-hmm. Clarity in terms of what they're doing and as I mentioned, why they're doing. I think consistency in terms of turning up, one of the first things I'll talk to any business owner about is, how do we really optimize the use of your time? How do we make sure that you're investing in your time? Because before you know it, you're going to be doing all sorts of things in all sorts of different areas, and kind of that consistency of focusing on your business and the consistency required to focus in your business is pretty important. So when you look at those areas that they can get in the way of where you want to get to and slow you down. So I think they're probably the key areas that I would highlight in terms of answering that question.
How do you build conviction when you don't have the full plan?
So as a business owner, I think that the whole premise of not having a plan, there is no way you can be conviction, have a level of conviction in terms of what it is and where it is you want to get to. The cliche saying from, and again, it does come from the military, is kind of like failing to plan is planning to fail. So to create conviction in any business, you've got to have a real insight as to where you want to get to. Now, that might start with just planning tomorrow in a very simplest context. But what you start to do is you start to exercise the planning muscle, the learning how to plan. Mm-hmm. Most people just, work on a perpetual list of things to do, and at the end of the day they cross off what they've done, and then tomorrow's priorities is what's now top of the list. Oh, and by the way, anybody out there that knows this knows that they rewrite that list out because it's nice and smart and tidy again without all the crossings out on it. Well, that's not planning. That's just promoting the priorities and, you know, the urgency about stuff. So the very first point is that we're planning tomorrow, so that's the time I've got, that's what's in my diary. Can I get the stuff done that I want to do? Then you plan to get that stuff done. You know, once you get really good at planning a day, then let's have a look at planning a week. Once you can plan a week, then let's look at planning a month. Now, I know that sounds quite strange in some respects, and most people will go, well, I can do that anyway. Well, I challenge you, you know, actually go and do that. Actually go and set out the plan for a week of what it is you want to achieve, and then tell me how it goes. The point is getting the muscle memory of planning. The long-term plan, and again, with all of my business clients, you know, we will always focus on quarterly planning. We'll always know where we're going in the next 12 to 18 months, and we'll always have very early on within the first few months a 5-year plan of where we're getting to and what we need to achieve. Because once we have that, it means that we've got the ability to start to respond to what's going on. So right back to what I said at the beginning, the caveat of kind of like, you know, failing to plan is planning to fail. The flip to that is no plans from the military, no plan survives contact with the enemy, but no plan doesn't survive, and you put everyone in peril. So the fact that you can plan, the fact that you're, you know, educating yourself and training yourself and practicing how to plan means that when you do need to actually have that ability, it's there.
Right.
You might have a plan, and any plan is a work of fiction, and at some point it may actually, you know, swing one way or the other. But at that point, you then know actually what I need to do to actually bring myself back on the track, or how do I replan. Without it, everything's a crisis.
And what's a leadership mistake that you made early on in the army that stayed with you?
Okay, so there have been many. I think there's one that I would reflect on. I always term it as kind of like every leader at some point goes through a humbling experience. Something that just brings them back down to earth again. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that, you know, leaders elevate themselves through ego and the like, but again, it is out there. And there is a responsibility to leadership. So we were on operations. I was a platoon commander. We were in Bosnia. The officer commanding, so the OC and the sergeant major, we all went into what we call a no group, so an orders group, to get a brief on what we were doing for the day and where our vehicles were going and how the day was going to progress. So I remember we'd all got to this RV, all driven down independently, multiple different routes, pulled up, 3 platoons, OC, his Land Rovers in their armoured vehicles are around, and we get called in. So I go across there, and I can remember vividly, you know, he had the map on the front of his Land Rover, and I remember putting my rifle down on one side of the map to hold the map down whilst he briefed us. And if you're ex-service, you'll probably know where this is going next. And if you know me, you probably will recall this and remember this anyway. But what was really interesting was I remember, you know, the plan that we had, you know, the brief that we got, and remember at the end of it, he's kind of like, right, kind of, any questions? And I'm kind of like, no, let's go. You know, eager, full on, you know, remember running back to the armoured vehicle, getting in up into the cupola, and we're off and running. And it must have been about an hour and a half late. It was a significant period of time, and I remember shouting down to my platoon sergeant and asking for my weapon. You'd normally leave your weapon down the cupola unless you wanted to bring it up, you know, because you had a different weapon on the top of the cupola. And he went, where is it? And I said, it was down in the footwell. So I'd always put it in the footwell. And you come back and it's not there. So you can imagine that I'm kind of like getting a little bit irate now, and there's a few F's and Jeffs going on here. And like, stop mucking about, don't take a mickey at me, pass my weapon up. And he's adamant that it's not down there. So I then on the radio to the driver, and I'm like, right, pull over. So all of our vehicles pull off the road onto the side. And then I'm going down there. Now I'm quite literally in blind panic. It's kind of like, you know, where's my weapon gone? I'm tearing this vehicle apart. And then there's kind of like this realization that the last time I saw it was on the Land Rover of the OC's wagon. And the real challenge here was then I had to get on the radio. So who's on the radio? So the call sign is called 33 Alpha, and this is the company sergeant major, a very, very good friend of mine. And I can remember very meekly coming up there. So my platoon was three platoon. So my call sign was 30 Alpha, and he's 33 Alpha. So I'm like 30. It was the main headquarters. I'll give you a little bit of radio spiel here. The main headquarters is 0. So I'm like 030 Alpha over. And it's kind of like 3 Alpha send over. So I knew instantly he'd been waiting for me to make this radio call because he had my weapon. It was on the OC's vehicle and he's in the OC's vehicle. So I knew that he'd kind of got it. Not 100%, by the way, but I'm kind of like, that's the last time I saw it. So the fact that he's immediately responded, kind of like in your mind, you're going like, yeah, I've been captured here. I've been captured. So I'm kind of like, 3 Alpha, have you got my weapon over? So rather than just going, yes, over, it's 3 Alpha, say again over. So I had to then repeat this again. Now, this is a company-wide network. So everybody who's got a radio in the company on the operations now listening to me as the platoon commander of 3 Platoon, ask if the sergeant major has got my weapon. It was quite possibly the most humbling moment I had as a leader. And I think in leadership, everybody goes through, I'd like to call it a humbling moment. And it's recognizing that humbling moment. Mm-hmm. And when you recognize that moment, take it for what it is. You're not bulletproof. You're not indefensible. You're not superhuman. We make mistakes. And I think sometimes you've got to recognize, and I can remember because I'd given the platoon sergeant a load of shit and, shouted at him and kind of like going off my head on that. And I had to apologize to him immediately. I was like, really, really sorry. But I'll never forget that humbling moment because for me, it kind of like there is a mark of leadership there in terms of how those moments change you if you let them. Mm-hmm. And accepting the fact that you made a mistake. Now, over the years, I've had a few of those. Mm-hmm. As a coach out here working with, business owners and executive, I've made mistakes. But the bit that I've always tried at my root is to kind of like, the moment I realise it's kind of like, I held that, that's mine. Mm-hmm. We have the context of, getting above the parapet, where responsibility, accountability and ownership lives. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me is what comes from a humbling moment.
So what did you learn about leadership when you were, cold, exhausted, under pressure?
I think there's many different occasions. I think it at the root of this, it's about mental resilience. I can remember there was on a pretty challenging exercise in Canada as a battalion, and you think of Canada, you think of wonderful weather, but this, it wasn't. I think we were on a place called Wainwright. We'd been out for a long time. We're not talking days, we're talking 2 or 3 weeks. And remember, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We, as a battalion, all the companies had come together in a location, and you had battalion headquarters in the middle. 3 o'clock in the morning. To say it was raining is kind of like, if you imagine that just pouring a bucket of water over you. And I remember me and a really good friend of mine, another sergeant major, utterly dejected. We were walking between locations, and we were just outside, and we just literally just sat in the mud and the bushes, absolutely drenched to the foot, and kind of like just sharing how crap it all was, how utterly shit it was, how kind of like, when it, doing the old, it'd be lovely just to have a nice cup of tea right now, be at home in my own bed, be back with the family, all those type of things. And then I remember looking at each other and going, okay then, let's get back to him. And it literally was just a momentary, it's kind of like, okay, let's go back to him. And he went back to his company, I went back to my company. And that was a level of mental resilience that it was horrible. And there have been multiple occasions in my military career where that's been the case. And you just kind of like pick yourself up and get on with it. And it's recognizing, I think there is a case of, and you see this in business, I think that often people don't realize how much mental resolve they have. One of the biggest challenges today, and it's one of the reasons that I wrote, 5 and 20, the Buddy Buddy book about, how to help service folk and veterans overcome some of the challenges. Now, I'm not talking, the severe challenges of the likes of PTSD and the like, but the basis of mental resilience of being able to know that you can push through certain things that you maybe thought you couldn't. And all of us have that ability, but very few really take the opportunity to really push themselves through it. Mm-hmm. And I think we live in a world today where it's kind of like mental health as a phrase gets a bad rap, and everybody seems to have a mental health problem. or a challenge. I generally don't think they do. I think the vast majority have a mental resilience problem. I don't discount at all from anybody that has, active mental health challenges, but the vast majority is mental resilience. It's like physical health. We don't talk about physical health in anything but a good positive tone about going out there and getting on with your physical health. But you talk about mental health with someone and immediately, it's kind of, oh, now we're getting better at talking about it, but now we just seem to have turned the volume up so much that everything is mental health. I don't think it is. I think a lot of it is mental resilience. And I think that's down to, as an individual, it's kind of like actually recognizing that some things you just got to push yourself through. Get through the hardship because you're going to come out the other end of it a better person. Now that might not sit comfortably with some people listening to this, but again, having been that person and been in those situations, I can say from my own personal experience, it is about mental resilience and just being able to push through.